Back when I was at school, I was asked all the time what it felt like to be alone. I'm an adult now and have moved away from the small town I grew up in, but the emotional scars remain. Growing up, I lived in a modest house with my mom and dad, which was just down the road from my school. I was old enough to walk to school myself. My dad was away with work a lot, and my mom held down 2 jobs, cleaning for one of the well-to-do families and a secretarial position. So I guess this suited them as well. It would be far enough to say I was a solitary child. I spent a lot of time with my head in a book. I loved science fiction best. When I was not traveling to Mars or battling gas monsters on Venus in my imagination, I used to like to walk down to the river and throw pebbles in the water. This was when I was the happiest. Being at school was the worst time for me. There were only a few hundred people who lived in town and only one school. There were 13 of us in my class, 6 sets of twins, and me. Now, with the hindsight of time and having lived life, I can see that this was weird. I looked up the stats just now, and there are 33 twins in every 1,000 live births in this country. So there's nothing odd about being an only child, apart from in that cramped room where I sat by myself at a table near the window. All the others sat in pairs. 3 of the twins were boys, 2 girls, and 1 mixed. 2 sets of twins were identical, and the others weren't. Our teacher was a spinster in the parlance of those days. She spent most of the school day writing on the chalkboard or reading to us from textbooks. There was never any rowdy behavior for her to deal with. The twins would sit in perfect silence all day long. Having no one to talk to, I did the same. Each pair of twins seemed to be in sync, opening their books at the same time, turning pages in one flowing movement, writing at the same speed. At lunchtime, when we took out our packed lunches, I swear they even chewed their food at the same pace. Doing everything differently and on my own, I stuck out real bad. And as each endless school day dragged on, I could tell I was being stared at. The teacher never said anything about the situation, never extending me a helping hand. I can only assume she saw nothing wrong. And in her defense, it was only as we were filing out of school that anything blatant ever happened. The sets of twins would take it in turns to whisper as they passed me. "What does it feel like to be alone?" This only lasted for a minute or so, but every day, as soon as I thought I was out of sight of them, I would sprint for home and throw myself onto my bed, bury my head into the pillow, and burst into tears. I thought this would never change. The way it did haunts me to this day. They were called Thomas and James Morton. They were identical in every way, as far as I could see. It was a Saturday afternoon in late spring, and I had gone down to the river to skim pebbles across the surface of the water. My troubles weren't forgotten, but they did seem further away when I saw them. The Morton twins. They were standing higher up the riverbank looking down at me. I froze. There was a glimmer of darkness in their eyes. Of malice. A smile flickered across their faces as they moved together towards me. I started to back away and I felt cold water lapping at my feet. I was standing in the river. I glanced around, trying to see a way to escape. The other bank was too steep and overgrown with weeds to scramble up. I didn't know what the twins wanted with me, but my guts were screaming at me that it was bad. I felt hunted and very afraid. They kept walking, each step in time. Without really being aware that I moved deeper into the river. It was shallow in places and slow-moving, but soon transformed into a deep, fast-running body of water. A dozen paces away from where I stood, I could see where the river began to flow at speed. I think the Morton twins must have spotted this as well, because they entered the water and stood in front of me, blocking me from the shallows. "What does it feel like?" they began in unison. "To be alone. What does it feel like? What does it feel like? Alone, alone, alone." As they spoke, they inched closer. I kept retreating backwards. I could feel the water rising around my knees. It was getting harder and harder to move. I wanted to cry, to scream out, but there was no one to help me. There never had been. I was alone. And they were as one. Suddenly they rushed me. I stumbled, fell. I was not thinking clearly. I did not plan. It did not mean for it to happen. I stuck out a hand to cushion my fall and found myself on my backside, the water enveloping me. I felt a stone on the riverbed, lifted it free of the water, and lashed out. I didn't mean to. I caught one of the twins on the forehead. To this day, I do not know which one. He cried out in pain and fell forwards into the river. The flow caught him and he was carried away. Within seconds, he was 12 feet away, 24, until he reached a pool where the river's flow was stilled, where he remained. He was face down in the water, wasn't moving in any way. I had been transfixed by what I was seeing until I heard gasping. I turned around to see the other twin. He was still standing close to me, up to his knees in the water. He was clutching his chest, was clearly struggling to breathe. And then he stopped gulping in air. He just stood there, looking into the distance at his twin floating motionless in the river. He did not speak to me, did not look at me as he waded past, as he lay face down in the water and let the flow take him. He did not struggle as he drowned. I could only stand and watch. The current brought him to his brother. Their bodies were silent and still. They were together as they had always been, as they always will be. I was scared. I would spend the rest of my life on my own.